Hello, and welcome to the Battle of the Hockey Pool Guides. I am Dimitri, and I am the author of the Hockey Pool Guide 8 blog. I imagine that some of you are curious, why am I doing this? And it's a good question. I, like you, love hockey pool drafts. I like the strategy, I like the anticipation, and I like to be victorious. It is for all those reasons that I am trying to find a better way in evaluating all the hockey pool guides and draft lists that are produced each season. My hope is to influence the content creators to improve on their future forecasts, using a better measure or rating of fantasy hockey point predictions. And you should benefit from their improvements. We will explore my evaluation methodology through these series of videos, but let's get started by meeting last season's competitors. We will be pitting 8 guides against each other in a head-to-head draft. In no particular order, we have the Hockey News Ultimate Fantasy Pool Guide, Scott Cullen's Fantasy Hockey Projections, Hockey the Magazine Pooler's Guide, NHL.com Fantasy Point Projections, the Sports Forecaster NHL Preview and Fantasy Guide, Dauber Hockey's Annual Guide and Draft List, Steve Laidlaw's Fantasy Hockey Rankings, and an aggregation of all of them. This aggregation includes using last year's rankings as well as a 3-year average. We have assigned a letter for each guide to keep them safely anonymous until the reveal at the end, and have also randomly selected a draft order. We note that some guides have projected more values than others, and we will stop the draft once one of the guides runs out of players. Now comes the fun part. Let's start the draft. The first overall pick is Connor McDavid. Team A has made a perfect prediction, but as you know, McDavid wasn't the best player last year, so while the prediction looks good, they have put themselves in a bit of a hole. Team B selects Nikita Kucherov, and they start the draft with a big miss. Almost every list had him either as a number 1 or number 2 guy, so all the guides would have missed the mark. The next pick is Leon Draisaitl, and Team C could not have been any more excited to obtain the best player. This is especially true because they had him ranked 3rd overall in their projections. They would have missed out on bringing in the best player had they the 1st or 2nd selection of this draft. Nathan MacKinnon goes to Team D 4th overall. He was within 20 points of their projection. However, there were a few players that did better. Team E takes Patrick Kane, and like MacKinnon, he too was within 20 points of their projection. Team F was unfortunate to have landed Sidney Crosby this draft because each of the guides rated him highly. He missed his projection because of injury. The next pick was Steven Stamkos for Team G. He too missed his projected mark by a lot. The final pick of the first round goes to Team H, and they took Brad Marchand. They were happy because he was 3rd on their list. The only downside was that there were 2 other players available that did better. In summary, we had more than half the projections be really far off the mark. Guide C has a 13-point lead on Guide A and 17 over Guide D. You would think that the first round would have been much closer. After all, these are the best of the best being taken. You will notice at the bottom there is a running total of projection classifications. Perfect, within 5, within 10, 20, and over 20 points. This has been the standard used when evaluating player point projections, and we will keep an eye on the ratings as we continue the player selections. The first pick of the second round, going to Team H, is Johnny Gaudreau, and it was a choice that was well off the mark. Next was Mikko Rantanen for Team G. Like Crosby, he failed to meet his prediction because of injury, but not all the guides valued him as highly as Guide G did. Guide F turned out to nab the 3rd best player last year with their selection of David Pastrnak. The thing is that they had 5 other players ranked higher than him on their list, and were simply fortunate that those guys were taken by the other teams. Pasternak's projection turned out to be within 5 points of his total. So what does that say about the guide for those other players that they valued much more? Our next selection for Guide E was Alexander Barkov, and it was a miss. Ovechkin was picked by Guide D, and even he missed his forecast by a lot. By now I can hear you screaming that it was due to the season not being played out fully, that the pandemic is to blame for some of these missed choices. That is partially true. Ovechkin was taken 13th overall, and this guide felt he would be the 12th best player. Reality, though, says that he was the 19th best. It is a big deal to leave points on the table for others to grab. The same thing is true of Team C's selection of Mitch Marner. They were the benefactors of getting Draisaitl, but they returned the gesture to the other guides with this pick. The projection misses continue with John Tavares going to Team B. And the final pick of the round was Blake Wheeler. At least he was within 20 points of his projection. That is something, right? It was a brutal round, and it shows. More than half of the currently selected players are decisively off of their projections, and the standings clearly show that the majority of the guides are more than 30 points from the leader, after only 2 rounds. The Breadman comes in at pick 17, and Guide A is thrilled to have him. Nothing seems to be going right for Team B. Their selection of Giroux was off the mark. I have mentioned it earlier, and I will repeat it again. While statistically the numbers are off because a full season was not played, the players that are far from their predicted values are being surpassed by others. Those other players have not played a full season either, but somehow they managed to be better. Case in point, after Taylor Hall is picked, 8 of the top 20 players have yet to be taken. And here's another that shows the disconnect between evaluating the range of the projected total to reality. Guide E shouldn't care how far off the projection was. What should only matter is if Huberdeau was the best player available when their turn came. Guide F was fortunate to select Austin Matthews, a steal when so many others are making mistakes. How can we compare the difference in value between Guide G's selection of Sebastian Aho being within plus or minus 20 points to Guide E's selection of Huberdeau, who's also within plus or minus 20 points? Because there is a difference. And the third round ends with Tyler Seguin. He missed the mark for Guide H. All in all, this round went a lot better for the guides than did the second round. From Guide A's point of view, they are not far off from their players' projected totals, and they are leading the way. For now, we would believe that this is the guide that knows what they are doing. Guide H tries to recover by drafting Elias Pettersson, but they leave better players for the other guides to collect. Picking up Malkin and his projection being within 5 points would make Team G happy, until they realized that they could have done better. Another selection, this time Shafley to Guide F, that underperforms. Amazingly, Guide E grabbed Jack Eichel, who was the best player available. They didn't let this opportunity slip by them. The same could not be said for Guide D, who unfortunately selected Alex DeBrincat. Now, as our projected points totals start to decrease, then being more than 20 points off of the projection should happen less frequently. It is far easier to miss a projection of 100 points, where 20 points is 1/5 of the projection, than it is to miss a projection of 60 points, where 20 points is 1/3 of the projection. The draft continues to produce some more underperforming picks. Guide C adds Patrice Bergeron to their collective fantasy team. Jake Guentzel goes to Team B, and they fully feel the brunt of his injury. We do note that every guide would have evaluated Guentzel as a big missed opportunity, but those guides that ranked him in the mid-40s range of all players would have fared better than Guide B. And our last pick of the round is Guide A's Sean Monahan. This and a few other guides felt he would do much better in the 2019-2020 season. After 4 rounds, Guide A's lead has evaporated to Guide E. 3 points separate first from second place. Guide B is in the cellar, down by 84 points. That is an average of 20 points plus missed in each round, which is easy to believe because more than a third of the top 32 players have been passed over. The start of the 5th round doesn't produce much of a better result. Team A grabs Evgeny Kuznetsov, and it's another large missed projection. Guide B follows that up with another miss by drafting Dylan Larkin. A minor celebration is shown for the selection of Matthew Tkachuk by Guide C, but too many other players with better point totals were to be had. The next pick for Guide D is Landeskog, and he also was far from his projected total. With the 37th pick, Team E decided to take Brent Burns. It did not help them out very much. Then what seems to be a pick that came out of nowhere, Zibanejad was nabbed by Guide F, a very good selection because he was the best available player. Guide G then took a safe pick in Nicholas Backstrom, but even he was off his projected total by 20 points exactly. The 5th round concludes with the drafting of Alexander Radulov for Guide H, yet another missed opportunity. It may be hard to believe, but 40% of the NHL's 48 best players have not been drafted. Guide A has lost the advantage of having first pick and is now in second place to Guide F because of their misses and Guide F's huge pickup of Zibanejad this round. We will start looking at full rounds of the draft now just to expedite things. Guides H and A pick players that were within plus or minus 10 points, but in Guides A case, they still fell backward into 3rd place. 3 guides again selected someone that missed their projections by more than 20 points, and the other 3 guides took a player that was within 20 points of theirs. 25 out of 48 picks had been big misses. Round 7 was worse. Only Team G claimed a player that was within 5 points of their projection, but they still reside in 5th place in the standings. The next round was horrible in terms of players meeting their projections. The difference from first to last is close to 100 points now. This is after 8 picks. The 9th round improved things for some teams. Guide A spiked John Carlson, and despite his projection being within 20 points of his real total, they climbed into 2nd place. Guide G's selection of Mike Hoffman could not help them get into 3rd place, even though he produced within 5 points of his forecast. With Kyle Connor, we get another player that was within 5 points of his projection, and it was enough to push Guide E into 1st place. After 10 rounds, more than half the selections missed their projections by more than 20 points. Let's see if there's a correlation between the standings and the players' projections for each guide. Guide G clearly has a better rating, with 3 of their selections being within 5 points and 4 being within 20 points of their forecast. So why are they in 4th place? Why are they 40 points behind the leader, Guide E? With the only perfect prediction, Guide A is barely hanging on to 3rd place. And why is it that Guide H is worse off than Guide C when they have 2 predictions that were within 10 points and Guide C only has 1? Now I hear you screaming at me. You're saying that it's not fair to judge a guide only on the picks they made. You must look at all the projections, including the players they were not able to select. I agree. You are right. So let's look at the stats. Here is a table evaluating the projected top 80 players of each guide. The guide's team total is provided under their team letters. There were more perfect projections, but McDavid was the only player selected by the guide that had the perfect projection. Guide E had 2 perfect projections but couldn't capitalize on either. Guide G had a huge advantage in predicting players within 5 and 20 points, but they are still losing out to guides E, F, and A. We could even say the same thing for Guide H in comparison to guides B, D, and C. I hear you screaming at me again. This time you're saying it's only 10 draft rounds. Things will average out after more rounds are drafted. I again agree with you. So let's take a look at that. Here we see what the standings would be if we continued the draft. The milestone points are after 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and the maximum number of rounds possible, which turned out to be 38 in this case. The results show that Guide E does not fall beyond 3rd place, but is mostly rated to end up in 2nd. Guide F also does not drop below 3rd place, however, they are mostly the victors. Oddly enough, Guide H finds a way to get out of last place and into 1st, but only for a very, very deep draft. The guide that had the 1st pick can at best get into 2nd place. Guide G, who statistically looked to have the most accurate predictions, hovers between 4th and 6th place. We will investigate as to why this is so. The next set of slides will show you the full teams for each of the milestone markers, and then I will come back to the category analysis of the projections. A similar slide was shown a bit earlier, but it was from the point of view of each guide and only focused on their own predictions. The trouble is when we try and compare the results, the guides are comparing different sets of the predicted top 80 players. We are comparing apples to oranges. To standardize the evaluation, we will base the classifications on the actual top players of the 2019-2020 season for the particular milestones. Now we are comparing apples to apples. There were even more perfect projections, but McDavid continues to be the only player that was selected by the guide that made the perfect prediction in this draft. You will also notice the number within the parentheses. This represents where the guide ranked the player on their list. The next set of slides will show the category evaluations at each of the milestones. In comparing the results after 38 drafted rounds, that is 304 players, Guide G or Guide A look to be the best predictors. So why is it that guides H, E, and F do better than guides A and G? Why is Guide G near the bottom of the pool? Oh, I hear you yelling at me again. This time you're saying it's because of the order of selection. This was only one possibility, and it just happened to not particularly favor Guide G. If I had picked a different draft order, the results would improve for Guide G. Yet again, I agree. Well, I agree that this is only one scenario. However, I do not necessarily agree that things would improve for Guide G. So, I decided to run through all the unique drafting permutations. Yes, all 40,320 of them. Here are the summarized results. For short to medium-sized drafts, Guide F is victorious almost half of the time. For medium to long drafts, Guide A wins a bit over half the time. For deep drafts, Guide H wins close to 70% of the time. Guide E kinda hovers around 10% across all lengths of drafts. At best, Guide G is victorious 7% of the time, but only for very short drafts. How is this possible? We saw how accurate their forecasting was. How do Guides E and especially F have better win records than Guide G? Guide A was similar to Guide G, and they were able to at least win 25% of the short to long range drafts. What makes Guide C so bad that it comes dead last in close to 70% of all scenarios when their numbers look better than Guide F's? And this is where I say to all of you, measuring the accuracy of the projection is not as important as measuring the accuracy of the player rankings. More specifically, the measuring of the opportunities lost by ranking a player too soon or too late. I have plenty of examples from this draft to illustrate the concept, but we'll save that for the next video. While we wait for my next video, let me know which guides you think are the best. Or, if you feel strongly about it, tell me which guide is the worst. I'm interested to hear what you think. Stay safe and stay tuned.